So today I'm going to be looking at more or less why people use parallel compression. Opening one of up, opening one of my projects. When I look into it, I realize that I haven't used any parallel compression at all. Now, since I'm designing EDM, parallel compression is quite a useful thing because it allows your track to have the the breadth and the space that is needed for a track to sound well because of dynamic range. And with the use of the compression, it still gives you a nice solid punch. Now, the best way I've found to use parallel compression is by designing a bus or a send channel. That is because you can then adapt how much of the actual compression you want to give to the entire track. Now, I don't necessarily use a lot of compression because I don't feel it's required as long as I mix it down correctly. But I do use a limiter to give me just a little bit more room in order to just push the track just a little bit more. Now, when it comes to using the compressor, I usually just go for the standard compression tools directly from within Logic, as third-party compressors aren't necessarily the best choice. Looking at my compression, I necessarily just change not a lot of things. I don't do crazy ratios or thresholds. I don't add a ton of makeup. I usually turn all of this off. Now, when it comes to using parallel compression, there's a lot of ways of using it. You can either use it on every channel and just choose how much of that compression is going through, or you can stick it on one individual channel and completely squash the hell out of a single channel. But I always use it in a bus channel because I can choose which track I genuinely wants to be compressed, or I think needs to be compressed, instead of applying it on a master, because then I can control how much of that sound is going into the chain and then going into my output and in through master. So looking at my intro, I will turn off the compressor and then I will start adding parallel compression throughout the track and seeing what can be added and what can't be added. So now most of that sound is starting to get routed through to the actual compressor. Now it's just more or less choosing how much compression needs to be done. As you can see now, there isn't any compression at all because, well, the threshold's really low and I don't have much sound pushing through the actual compressor. I'm just going to turn this up a little bit more. So now the compressor's actually starting to do some work, which is what it should be doing. But still not enough as I'd hope for it to be actually pushing. So now if I just turn it up a little bit on the input gain, pushing more sound into the actual compressor, making it doing its job. I'd usually have my ratios as they are, but just for the purpose of this, I will turn up the ratios to prove how much compression it actually could do and how it would affect my track. Moving it on onto the build up, because there's a lot more going on, I'll be able to see how much is actually needed to be compressed. now the parallel compression is going to work because, well, there's a lot more sound kicking through it, and I just turn up the knee because I want to effectively hear how hard it's being compressed. It isn't really the best choice to crank everything up, as it can make your track sound a little bit dirty and not useful. But for the sake of this video, I will turn the knee completely up just so it completely squashes it the moment it comes through. Remove all the attack and the release as much as possible. So as you just heard, it was a little bit, how can I say, squashed, and it removes all the breath from the track. If I just go over that again, this time without the compressor, you can hear it's got a little bit more breath and room now to actually move, for the track to actually have its dynamic range. But then again, turn the compressor on, all of a sudden it's lost its space and it isn't as strong as it used to be. It's just squashed. It's not developing its sound. There isn't any dynamic range. It's not peaking anywhere. Even though on my input gain there is starting to peak, even though I've turned it up by 4 dB. The reason I use parallel compression is because it adds punch to your track, which is needed so much in EDM, because the whole point of EDM is for it to hit you in your face and make people dance and move and do whatever they do to this kind of music, but you still need the space within the track to have a little bit of dynamic range. You don't want to squash it so when you're looking at the waveform of the track, once you've bounced it out into a wave, that you can't see where your kick is or where your synths are hitting. Which is why, again, parallel compression is a better idea, because compressing the actual master channel or just using a limiter would squash it to hell practically, which is not ideally what you're looking for in EDM. Which is why, again, parallel compression is highly used in EDM. There are other ways of doing parallel compression. This is the first way, which is creating a bus or a send channel and controlling how much of that sound is being pushed through. The second way is by actually bouncing out the track, bouncing out the entire track, and then cutting out segments that you want to be compressed in order to have more punch. For example, I would most likely take the drop section, the chorus section, or better known as the drop in EDM, and compress it to absolute hell. But I would have a second version of it, which isn't compressed at all, containing the entire dynamic range, with the sidechain coming through. Even though the sidechain can't be seen, I do have a very large sidechain going through, which can be seen very vaguely at the start here, which is where most of the sidechain is done, through the first bar and the first beat and a quarter of it. I preferably use the bus or the sidechain for it to actually duck its sound or compress it into a certain way. But ideally, I don't like using compression unless I feel it's peaking a lot, or I've turned the fader almost to the very bottom and it's not going anywhere. But then yet again, it really does depend on the user and what he was planning to do with the actual track. But yeah, you can actually see that compressor starting to go to work now. It's not ideally what I'd want to do, but it is a very good technique when it comes to making EDM, because I'm not clipping anywhere. I've got some stereo going, and it sounds like it's got punch to it. It's not flat or dead or squashed, but it has the punch, it has the energy going, and it's still keeping that dynamic range going. No matter how many times I'll squash the hell out of it, I'll put the distortion up, which isn't necessarily needed. I could change the mixing with the input output. There's a lot of stuff that can be done, but yet again, I'm not a fan of using parallel compression. Even though it is useful in my line of genre, I'm not necessarily a fan of it. Here's just a graph of how much is actually ducking the actual sound, even though it doesn't necessarily need to be ducked, as there's nothing going on here. There's no peaking, there's no crazy compression that needs to be done, even though it is doing some for some odd reason. But then again, on my build up, compression kicks in, and it has the energy, it has the squash sound, everything's working the way it should work. Another thing I could do is change the actual compressor that I'm using. But again, I don't like using this. I'm not used to the Logic compressors, as my main DAW being the FL Studio or Fruity Loops, because I've been using it for several years, and most of the time I do use third-party plugins, but not on Logic, as the in-DAW plugins, the in-box plugins are very good. Nothing needs to be changed. It works all fine. Now, if I mess around with this, it should sound a little bit different. But yet again, not a great fan of these kind of the use of parallel compression. I'd rather just make sure that my track sounds well, and then probably use a limiter if it is peaking anywhere, so that it instantly ducks it for me. Now the difference with all these compression tools are, all these compression sounds, or they synthesize the actual sound of what each of these compressors would be like in hardware. With it being, I don't remember exactly what each of these tabs would be originally, but they are all more or less designed around real hardware tools, and each making it sound different. For example, the Studio FET, I can just tell that it's ducking a lot more sound than it should be, even though the presets are exactly the same as they were previously. For example, if I go back to that drop, it's ducking almost 10 dB here. Over here it's ducking almost 5, sometimes going over 5 if need be. Also on my premium digital, it's going -6, -7, maybe -8 if there is a lot of compression that needs to be done. But yet again, I'm not a great fan of this. It does have some pros of it giving, the track necessarily punch that it needs to have. When designing EDM, your tracks need to be strong, they need to hit hard, but I use a limiter. Whereas for people use parallel compression or just compression on the master. It really is your own choice and what you actually want to do with the sound, whilst it depends really to their own personal use. I don't use compressors as much. I rather use a limiter at the end of my mix-down process. But then yet again, as I said previously, it is literally preference. What do you prefer having in the sound? Would you like to have it? Do you like it to duck or instantly being cut? Well, I like it instantly being cut. Someone prefer it to duck that range over a certain period, where I would just cut using a limiter. It would just squash it to hell. There are some cons to using parallel compression, is that you're not necessarily going to get the sound that you always want with everything going through one compressor, even though you're choosing how much you want to push through that compressor and deciding what goes how and your ratios, your makeup, your distortion, if you want to use distortion on your track or on the compressor, which I doubt anyone likes to use the distortion. But again, personal choice. But as you can see, it is starting to go to work. The compressor's doing its job. It's giving me the punch that would necessarily be needed for the actual track, instead of it being a ton of the dynamic range, where this would squash it, still have its dynamic range, yet still give it energy and punch that it would have from compression. Just turn it off quickly so you can tell the difference, which is very faint, but it still does make a difference when playing it through a large PA system in a club or on a festival, depending on what your choice of performance is. And once the compressor's kicked in, I can hear that it starts to have a bit more room and everything works better. Even though my stereo is going absolute mental right now, it is doing its job. A lot of people may think I'm crazy that I don't like using parallel compression because it's used a lot in EDM, but I think there's a way of getting around parallel compression that you don't necessarily need to use it, where if you mix your track down correctly, as you can see, it may seem a little bit messy and the faders are not correctly done. I feel this mix is correct for me. And now if I take the compressor off and if we go back for the same drop routine, I'm not clipping no matter what. I have a ton load of headroom, so now when I do send it off to get mastered, because this is only me mixing it down, he can turn it up, and and if the master wants to actually go ham on the limiters and the compressors and turning certain sections up, he has a ton of room. He or she has a ton of room to work with, because that is very small compared to what I would have on other projects, which would be literally peaking at the 0.1 mark. I hope I've explained parallel compression to you correctly and you know what it does and what can be done with it, as I don't use it that much. I have looked into it a lot to make sure that I've explained it correctly and why people use it, why people don't use it. Yeah, so thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later.